All right, everybody, welcome to the Voice in the Pen podcast. Emily and I are super stoked today to be talking with Sam Hatch of the Hatch Brothers.
It's good to be here.
Yeah,
Welcome,
thank
welcome.
you. Yeah, you're a Wilmington native, right?
I sure am.
I mean, to be honest, I think that you might be the first Wilmington native that we've talked to
That's about
on
right.
this show.
I think you're right. Yeah.
I can relate. I grew up in a small town in South Carolina, and I'm not a native there anymore because I don't live there. But, you know, it's odd to run into us in those small towns like that.
It's so bizarre. I keep having these conversations recently with a lot of people where I get looks of shock and awe when they're like, "Where are you from?" And I'm like, "I'm from right here." And they're like, "That's weird. That's weird."
And not only are you a native from Wilmington, but you're a native that comes from a musical family in Wilmington. So you guys have been like super in touch with the music scene for a long time.
Absolutely.
So can you tell us a little bit about that? Like, how did you wind up doing what you do? What made you say, I'm going to pick up a guitar or other instrument and write songs?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. My dad is a classical guitarist, and he has a degree. He has a master's degree in classical guitar. So I grew up in a house where music is always being played, and it's so funny to watch baby videos, you know, young videos of my brother and I on the VHS, and if you don't know what that is, Google it. But watching
TK
those,
knows.
watching on the VCR, and it's so funny to see my dad like every Christmas or Easter or whatever getting us these little music instrument gifts and being like, and me and Paul we pick up like the little toy trumpet and we go, and then we go. And then we move on to like the toy car and, and the look of defeat in his eyes. No, but it was so funny to watch that he always wanted us to go into music, but he never forced us.
That's cool.
And it was funny that my mom, of all people, was the one who did force us.
Oh, is she a musician?
She is, and she's a wonderful musician, and she plays piano and she sings very well. But she not as a career or anything. Just she grew up singing and playing in the church, and so she was like, "You're taking piano." And when I first started piano, I hated it. Which I feel like, I feel like that's a pretty universal experience.
Yeah.
You know, when something like that
Yeah.
is forced upon you, you're like, I have zero interest in this, and I couldn't even practice 5 minutes a week. I absolutely hated it.
I hated practicing too.
Yeah, so this was like when I was like in, fifth grade. I absolutely resented it. And then I didn't come back to it until I was in high school. And this is after I had decided to play guitar. Weirdly enough, I wanted to pick up guitar because, and everyone in my age group can relate to this, there was this huge movement that happened called Guitar Hero.
Yes.
Which inspired so many people that I know
Yes.
personally, where they were like, I want to play guitar. And I was one of those people because I would come home every day and practice Guitar Hero. I'm so sorry that this is how the interview starts. But I would come home every day and I would practice on Guitar Hero for hours because I loved that game. And I really loved the music. And it was so funny because I grew up on classic rock because my dad absolutely loves classic rock. But it was funny to grow up in two different worlds where in my dad's car, he played classic rock. He played modern rock. He played classical music.
She's like an omnivore of music.
Absolutely. Like, so I was getting exposed to jazz. I was getting exposed to classical music. I mean, my dad would put on Holst, The Planets, Mars, and we're listening to that. And and I'm in the back seat like doing the big drums.
Jamming out
And
your
I'm
drums.
like, this is so awesome. And then in my mom's car, she's listening to the top 40 pop. Pop hits.
Yeah.
So I'm getting a little bit of that Britney Spears. I'm getting a little bit of that, Backstreet
NSYNC,
Boys.
yeah.
Yes, exactly.
I'm going to date myself and say Belinda Carlisle.
And I grew up in those two worlds, and so it was like depending on what car I was in, that was what I was being exposed to. But I think that was a huge influence on how I play and write and think of music.
Yeah.
Is that I'm constantly thinking of all these different genres and blending genres, and I don't like to box myself into one feeling or one idea.
Yeah, I mean, so it's been interesting watching you on The Voice and the Pen, right? So we see you perform as a solo musician and see what you've written, but then we also see these collaborations that have kind of come out of that and how you've worked with people on arrangements and changing things musically, So fast forwarding a little bit, you've Guitar Hero God, and then formal music school training in college. You went to Campbell for music school, right? And now you're out there in the world being a professional musician and writing and creating and producing and doing basically everything you can do in the music industry. It seems like.
I feel like to be a full-time musician, to do what a musician does full-time, you have to diversify. That's what I have students who ask me, how do I become a full-time musician? How do I do music full-time? And I say, don't specialize. Don't lock yourself into one thing. Be willing to do anything and everything. And if somebody says, can you do this? You say yes. And then you figure it out. And then now you can put that on your resume. So I just to kind of fill in the gaps a little bit. Yes, I grew up singing in church, and I grew up, Guitar Hero and taking piano lessons that I hated. But it was high school where there was a transformation that was beginning to happen in my life. And then it was college where that transformation was complete, because my path had kind of already been determined for me, where I was supposed to go into pre-med. I was supposed to be a doctor. I wanted to be an anesthesiologist.
Oh.
I went to Campbell for that reason. And there was a few huge things that happened in my life that drastically changed the path of that. The first thing that I would say is the most influential for me was my grandparents both had Alzheimer's. And so I took care of them for years and years and years. And my grandmother played piano, and I grew up listening to her play piano, and she was the piano player at our church, our little country Baptist church. And she played by ear, couldn't read a lick of music, but she could pick out a tune, and she could tear up the keys. I mean, she was a phenomenal country gospel piano player at ragtime piano. So like could really play the hell out of those keys. Or play the heaven out of those keys. That's a stupid joke. But anyway, she was an incredible player. And that was the last thing to go. She couldn't remember me. She couldn't even remember her kids. And it was this slow death that I watched. Watching this person slowly fade away who I loved very dearly and I was very close with. And there was a lot of turmoil and tumultuous times in my household as a kid. And so we always, anytime there was any kind of trouble in the house, we always ran over to my grandparents. And I always would take solitude and my grandma. And my grandma would famously proclaim, I raised you. And it was very true. It was very true. And I loved that woman very dearly. And so watching her slowly pass, all her memories fade. But the last thing to go was music. And that was amazing.
Yeah.
She would be having a really bad day, nonverbal, and then she would sit down at the piano, everything was there. She knew all the lyrics, she remembered every note, every chord, and then afterward would look at me and go, I love you. And that would be the first thing that she would say that day. The nurses would tell me,
That's
she hasn't
powerful.
spoken all day. She doesn't want to eat. She doesn't want to do anything. And then she plays, and then she goes, I love you. And I go, I love you too, Grandma. And she goes, and I love Jesus. And I'm like, absolutely. And then I give her this big hug, and then she wants to talk.
Yeah.
And then she would just.
Did she become lucid after that and be able to be
Wow.
present?
It was this amazing. It was like the synapses were like being healed.
Yeah.
By music.
Yeah.
And then, the next day was like a reset button, but it was that had a huge effect on me. And I realized I love music that much too, that I want to give my life to music. And then after that, I remember being in college and I had been in the medical,
track or
The
pipeline or whatever.
exactly,
Yeah.
the track to the medical. And for a few years, I was 3 years in at that point, which is not the time, by the way, to decide that you don't want to do the thing that you're doing.
Thank God you came from a musical family.
It took some convincing. We'll put it that way. It took some convincing. But I remember I had this chemistry professor, and I don't know if he knows how much of an influence or an impact that he had on my life, because I had this chemistry professor who was very much a brilliant man who you were a number in his class. And he did not acknowledge you unless it wasn't enough that I had A's. You had to have A pluses for him to take notice of you. I was a number. But I remember this chemistry professor, the first time that he acknowledged me in his class was when he came up to me. This was in our lab. And he goes, "You sang yesterday at that event."
Yeah.
The sports event. And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "You did the solo. You're with the a cappella group?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "That was phenomenal." And he was like, "Boy, I wish that I could do what you do." And I was like, "What?" And he goes, what do you want to do?" And I was like, I want to be a doctor." And he goes, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "If I had an ounce of the talent that you have, I would do music in a heartbeat." He goes, I wouldn't want to be doing this."
Yeah.
I was like, "You are a doctor in a respected field, and you're teaching at a university, and I'm like, what are you talking?" And he goes, "Do you play instruments?" And I go, "I do." And he goes, "What instruments do you play?" I was like, "I play guitar, I play piano." And he's like, he goes, "No, I would trade my life for yours any day."
Wow.
And you never hear that. That's always like the musician path is like not what parents want you to pick.
Right.
You know, it's like you pick being a doctor. It's like, yes, if you say I want to be a musician, I don't think so.
And it's amazing because that's immediately what happened. I went home that day. I called my parents and I said, "I'm changing my degree." I said, "I'm going to do music. I'm going to do music, and I'm going to pursue it."
So this was like middle of your junior year, beginning of junior year, end of junior year?
This was so this was like in the middle of my junior year.
Yeah.
And music was, it was my, oh Lord.
Minor?
The minor, yes, it was my minor. And so I had already taken some music classes.
That was my next question. I was like, how did you make up that many music classes in 3 semesters?
Thank God. Thank God. I mean, it was still
Thank God
one
you
of those
came from a
things-
musical family.
It was still one of those things where I absolutely had to bust my hump to make up for that lost time. But then immediately the whole world opened up to me. I had so many professors that took me under my wing that they had been trying to pull me into that program for so long. But it was watching the chemistry professor who that was the final push that I wanted, that I needed.
It's wild when you get that acknowledgement, encouragement, empowerment especially from someone that's not a musician. It's great to get it from other musicians, but not always are musicians your audience and your crowd, right? So it's such a universal language that when people hear something that they know is good, they could have no training in music whatsoever, and they still know it's good, and they still can recognize what's behind creating that almost innately. So that's super cool that you got that kind of encouragement. That's an amazing story.
I'm forever thankful for it.
Sure. Who was the professor? You give him a shout out. Maybe he'll watch it.
Right, Dr. Womack. Dr. Womack, I don't know if you will ever see this or if you'll ever know the impact that you had on my life, but Dr. Womack, you made that decision happen for me.
Yeah.
Just that final push that I needed. And the best feeling ever was then going back into the Fine Arts building and telling my professors, Dr. Morrow, Dr. Carter, Dr. Whitley, I'm in. You got me.
Yes, finally.
Just the celebration of like, yeah, we got him. Because they had been telling me for years, they're like, you've got something here. They're like, it's not normal for someone to be this obsessed with music theory like you are. Like they're like, you really have a knack for it and you really love it.
Yeah.
And everyone and all the music majors hate it. So
Yeah.
like there's something weird going on here.
Yeah.
Like you've got a brain for it. You know, you really like this stuff.
So that's a good point too on the theory side. That's got to translate in to the arrangement work that you do that I was talking about earlier, but also into your songwriting. So thinking about this time that we're going to spend together, one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, you've seen a lot of different songwriting methods, you know, and like you ask a songwriter, how do you write? And they're like, well, that like it depends on the song, sort of.
Right.
But as you are working through theory and production and with students, is there, you know, some method or methodology that you find that's pretty consistently good? If like you're one of your students are like, okay, cool, I can play, you know, 6, 8, 10 chords on the guitar now, but I want to write a song. How do I do that? You know, what would your advice to them
That's
be?
such a good question. I stand by this method because it works for me so many times. I don't know what camera to look at. There we go. Oh, there's this camera pointing right at me. I'll look at this one. There's this method that works for me so often, and I love this method, is I write, 9 times out of 10, I write a chord progression. I usually start with an interesting chord progression and rhythmic idea, right? This earworm that kind of gets stuck in my head. It can be a riff, it can be a chord progression, or it can just be those things with a really strong rhythmic idea. The point is that I'm setting some sort of foundation to what the sound is.
Like a mood in a way.
Yeah, exactly. And then on top of that, I hit the record button.
Key.
Yes.
I hit the record button, and then I sing along to it. And it is complete and utter gibberish. And
Just
but
like vocalizing almost?
Yes,
Yeah,
it-
not even words necessarily.
it works. It works. I will be damned. It works.
It's crazy you say that because, you know, I've had a lot of different ways that I've written, but as I've gotten more proficient as a guitar player and more proficient as a looper, that's become something I really enjoy doing, is finding a chord progression and a rhythm I like, laying that track down, and then just noodling over the top with the melody until I find a melody line that I like.
Yes.
And then singing that, vocalizing it, and then seeing if any words come. And if I really like it and can loop a coherent phrase, then I'll just leave the loop running and sit down and try and start writing lyrics.
That's what it is. That's what it is. Is that you have found the foundation, you found the mood for the piece. And now what I'm doing is I'm doing more than a few things when I'm doing that. It allows you to find the melody that works, the melody that really works with that chord progression. You're finding a rhythmic content for the melody as well. You're finding a rhythm, a strong rhythmic presence as well. And then you're also, most importantly, in my opinion, you're finding the vowel content that you want, that feels right over that. Because certain songs have a certain vowel content where some songs, it sounds more right to have those darker vowels, right? The more open, darker vowels. And then some songs, it feels more right to have those really bright, small vowels.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
And you start to piece those things together, and then you're figuring out the sound of the words that you want, the sound of the words, rather than the actual words themselves. And every single time I do it, also, there's always this moment where I'll be listening back to the recording. That's also a really important part. Listen back to the recording.
Yeah. Staying organized.
And when you're listening back, oftentimes there will be something that sounds like a word or a phrase that I'll sing in a moment. And I go, that sounded like I said this, and then there's an idea. And sometimes I'll build the whole song off of that one idea. I go, that's a really good phrase, or that's a really good word. And then that can give me the whole song content just from that.
Do you ever wind up like in reverse order where you come up with like a lyrical hook? And I think the best example I can think of right now is a song that I'm kind of obsessed with by Ethan Hansen. I don't know if you know Ethan locally, but he has a song called Man Overboard, right? So he has
I've
taken
heard it, yeah.
this phrase that is really common, right? And then he's turned it into a love song that he's a man overboard when he's around her, that
Oh,
kind
wow,
of thing.
yeah.
And so it's interesting to me to see sometimes the lyric comes first and then you can, have you ever written that way where you have a lyric hook and then you create a mood like, oh, I like this, I could use it differently and here's the feel I want to create. Because when you have that theory knowledge, you're like, oh, I can create any mood I want to.
Yes. No, so that's it's a really cool challenge to do that as well. I view it that way as a challenge, when a challenge to myself, because I never want to feel like I'm always taking one path to write songs. And so I would definitely say 8 out of 10 times is that other method, but I certainly have songs where I start with a phrase, I start with words that just have come to mind, and then I build a mood around that. And that's oftentimes when I'm writing compositions for or short films or animations, because I've written orchestral instrumental music for those kinds of things
like
as
scoring.
well. Yeah, exactly, scoring, and I've done that as well. And all you have to go by is the dialogue.
Yeah.
And so
a
Right.
dialogue and an image. Now, what do I want this image to feel like?
Right, and so it's cool to take that approach as well when it comes to songwriting. I would say the Surf in the Sky started with Surf in the Sky is a song by the Hatch Brothers, a group that I'm involved with, and I would say that song came from lyrics first.
Yep.
Lyrics
Okay,
first.
okay.
I had this paragraph. It was like the inspiration struck, and I just started writing in my notes app. I know I'm doing this, but it was more like this. And
Can relate.
I had
Relatable.
about I had about a solid paragraph of writing, and it just flowed out. I fell into the stream of consciousness. I tapped into it, like a radio frequency, just tuned in to
Downloading.
Yes. Yeah. The tuning into the universal flow and just boom, 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 boom. And then like what does that musically make me think of? What chords and what ideas can be built around that to convey that?
I think I told you, I sent you like a message I had taken. I was telling you about it too, the Songwriting Academy, like
School song.
seminar,
Yeah.
school song. No, it was a different one. It was just called the Songwriting Academy. And I messaged you about it because he was like, the guy was like very adamant about not writing a song or a melody or anything until you know exactly what that song's going to be about. And I found that very interesting. And I think your response was like,
That's different.
because I don't think that I could write a song. I think that there's so many different ways. And like, I don't think that you should necessarily just be like, well, I'm not going to write a song until I know exactly what it's going to be about. Because sometimes you figure it out by writing.
That's a cool story, right?
Certain
to say that you
things.
didn't know. It's like a writer who's writing a novel and they don't know the ending until they get there. And I think that's a cool
Right.
I think that's a cool thing.
I
Yeah.
can totally relate to that because, people have asked me sometimes, like, where do you get stuck in your writing? And it's usually when I can't figure out where I want the song to go. It's like musically and lyrically, you build this tension, right? And then you have to release the tension somehow. And I'm like, okay, so do I want this to be like a happy song where the protagonist like overcomes and is encouraged and empowered and lifted up and does amazing things? Do I want it to be a heartbroken song? How do I want the flavor? And that's always the pivot point for me is like, well, what am I writing here? Like I got these words that go together and I got this sound that goes together, but what am I really trying to do with this?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's so cool to when I think that's why songwriting circles and Light Voice in the Pen, I think that is so instrumental to the culture of a city, of a culture of songwriters, because it's so cool to see people that I can tell when I'm listening to the song that they have a different approach. I can tell the lyricists from the music theory nerds because I can tell that the approach is different. I can tell that the approach is different. I love and respect how we're all given the same 12 set of notes. And it's amazing what you can do with them.
Yeah,
And
right.
how wildly different the results can be. and I love the songs that tell stories, and I love the songs that tell stories with the music. You know, it's I usually I can tell just from a first time listen. Usually I can tell if you started with the lyrics or if you started with the chords or the bass or the riff or whatever. And I love it all. I
Yeah.
love it all.
Even though it's purely instrumental, the song "Cliffs of Dover" comes to mind. You know,
Oh,
so
yeah.
recognizable.
Oh, yeah.
The whole thing is a story via guitar. And Eric Johnson's not a bad guitar player.
Pretty
He's pretty good.
Some would say. Some would say.
I've heard he's
very
all right.
good, yeah.
So fast forward to today, Hatch Brothers. You mentioned. Are you performing solely with the Hatch Brothers? You performing solo with the Hatch Brothers? What's your performance like these days? I mean, and where are you playing?
So right now, I'm performing a lot with the Hatch Brothers and putting a lot of my time and energy into it. We have a lot of new songs that we're releasing at the moment that we've been working on all of last year. Last year, it almost felt like a big hiatus where, you know, I was telling people, like, you know, God, I mean, I know y'all can relate to this. Big things are coming.
Yes.
Big things are on the way. And everyone's like, okay. Yeah,
May we
sure,
all have the
sure they
confidence
are.
of a local band announcing big things coming.
Yes. And, you know, we were telling people for like a year, because we knew working with Trent at Hourglass Studios, who you all have interviewed before.
Yep.
Working with him, we knew that we are very proud of this EP project that we've been working on with him. And these songs are gold. I think that we have evolved as a group from the first record, because in the first record we didn't. It was just a collection of songs that I had written over the course of 5 years,
Sure.
from being in college all the way through just getting out of college.
Yeah.
And there was no consistency to it. There was no thematic idea behind the album. It was just, I wanted to get these songs out because I had had them for years.
It makes sense. You know, I mean,
And-
it's such a marker in time. Like, that's what recording kind of is to me as an artist, anyways. Is like, this is where I was when I recorded these songs. And then you have to, like, release judgment about it and go,
Yeah.
it's just, I've made the recording.
yeah.
It's done. If people like it, that's cool. If they don't, that's cool. But, you know, 50 years from now, I can look back and go, wow, that was my first album. I maybe should have waited to record that.
But
And
it's,
so
it's such a
that's
cool photograph.
12
Right.
bar grievances. Just wanted to say that for everybody
Hey,
listening.
Thank you for that. No,
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And so a lot of that album is experimental and weird and strange. It was a tumultuous time in my life. Finding purpose, finding the meaning in myself, wondering if this decision that I made to change the whole course of my life was the right one. And I experimented with a lot of different things, and it was a crazy time in my life, and certainly wasn't sober for a lot of it. And so a lot of this just flowed out of me, this weird, confusing time. And so a lot of those songs reflect that.
Yeah.
And this album that we are releasing, we're drip feeding it to people.
You just dropped Grenadine?
We just dropped Grenadine, which
Yeah,
I'm
great tune.
I
Holy
appreciate
smokes, a
that.
great
Thank
tune.
you.
Yes,
Yeah,
I was listening to that on the way here too.
Oh, thank you, thank you. No, I'm super proud of it because I feel like I finally understand production, and I felt like that was a song where I got to flex my new production chops
Yeah.
of like how to produce, and I know how to vocally produce now and guitar, produce with guitars and make it. I was so eager for people to hear that song, so thank you for that.
Absolutely.
And so this overall, this new project, this new album, it's a lot more cohesive, and I feel like we understand now the Hatch Brothers sound, like what we are and what we're going to put out there. Now I still borrow from all these different weird genres, and I don't feel like I can really be put in a singular box. The next song that we're going to be releasing, it's like Black Keys meets Cab Calloway, which is
Okay.
really weird.
That's weird, but it's
I'm super excited for people to hear that too. And so that'll be out with, probably by the time that this comes out, that song will be
Nice.
out. You Don't Know a Thing is what that's called.
Oh, that's, I
Cool.
mean, and that's a great, like, that's kind of back to that. That's a really common phrase, you know,
Yeah.
in a way, like, you don't know a thing, like, you know, or I don't know a thing. I don't know. But I like that you've taken that, and lyrics always grab me. I love the music and the lyrics, but like a lyrical trick is always a hook for me, almost
Yeah.
immediately. I'm like, oh, that's that's a cool way to think about those words.
Absolutely. Like I love exactly what you're talking about, because we have our biases and our preconceived notions of what that phrase means. And then it's cool to watch it get turned on its head. And you're like, I never thought to interpret it like that.
Yes.
That's really cool. You're cool. That's cool.
Thank you for expanding my mind.
Yeah, exactly. Like expanding my mind, changing the way I think about these words and how we string them
Yeah.
together. I feel like oftentimes we fall into, this is where I do love the lyrical analysis, because I mean, so much of my life is spent with musical analysis, but I love lyrical analysis for that reason too. Of we use words and we really don't think about the meaning of them. We just
Boy.
kind of we know phrases and we use these phrases, and then but when we start to dissect the individual words, it's like, what are we really saying here? Where did this we just accept it at face value. We don't really dig in. And so that's where, when you're songwriting and every word is there for a reason, every word has a purpose, you really start to kind of think of it that way. Like, what is the meaning of this one word in this particular phrase? I love stuff like that.
I love it too. So we're going to have you play some songs for us, but before we do that, we definitely want to ask you, how do people find your music? Are you on all streaming platforms? Like, where is your music? Plug that, please.
Yeah. So right now, I have every intention of releasing a solo project within the next year, which I'm really super stoked about. But as of right now, my original music is the Hatch Brothers. I write all the songs, I write all the lyrics, and so it is right now it is the only public access to my brain at the moment. And so the Hatch Brothers is where you can find all of my music. We're on all the streaming sites. We're on YouTube. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. The Hatch Brothers Official is where you can find all that.
Okay, awesome. And then on the production side of it, you're doing production, so you got a studio or something that you're working out of. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another thing. By the time this comes out in the brand new studio, oh, you're fine. Yeah. But,
Sorry, TK.
But by the time this comes out, I'm working on I'm building right now a brand new studio that I'm super stoked about. I want to spend more time in production. I want to produce more. I want to bring artists' creations to life. Emily and I are working on some stuff right now of hers, and it sounds so good. And so I love being a producer, because I love people coming to me and saying, I have lyrics, I have chords, I know nothing of production. And I've had a few people
Sure.
come to me with that. They have lyrics and chords, and they go, is that not enough? And I go, oh, honey, come here. All right, it's all good. It's all good. Let's get started. Because you start to realize how empty it sounds when it's recorded. It's amazing how when you're sitting in a room like this and you have a guitar and you're just singing, it fills up the room quite nicely and you don't feel like it's lacking in any way. But then when it's recorded and you're listening back to it, it sounds so empty. It feels like you're listening to an empty room. And production is essentially just figuring out how to fill up that room, how to fill up the sound and make it sound as big as it possibly can, so that it grabs an audience and doesn't feel empty or lacking in any sense.
Yeah, when you're solo acoustic guitar and just your voice, you're narrowing your audience down to people that really they want that. They're
Yes.
looking for that. You know? But the audience for like the bigger music intake, they want that. The larger audience is like, I just recognize all the sounds. I'm drawn to that.
And
Absolutely.
I feel like
Absolutely.
working with you, like there's so many things that I've learned because you'll play something, you'll be like, this is like a pad. Like this is like, here's like a song with a pad under it. And I'm like, I never knew what that was, So it's like, I'm starting to listen to songs now and actually like pick out instruments. And it's really cool because it's like, in a way, developing my ear to like listen to you and see you work and add different instrumentation to the songs we work on for me,
Thank
which is
you for
really
that.
cool. It like really
Thank
brings
you.
it to life. Like I go in and I'm like, oh my God, this sounds so good.
Thank you. Well, and earlier when I said it, being a musician is all about just saying yes to everything. That is how I got into production. Because when we were recording our first album, I had a lick of production experience, goose egg. And it shows, because when we started that project, I didn't know anything about, and the people are going to cringe, and I'm sorry, but I didn't even know that you're supposed to double track guitars. I didn't even know these things. This was not a world that I was aware of. And so I just jumped in and I said yes. And I was working with Mike Daniel at Audio Scribe Studios, and they're in Whiteville now, and he's amazing. And he's taught me a lot of what I know, and he's brilliant. But that was his first big project too. And so he said yes. I said yes. And then we were just figuring this thing out together. And so as the project continued, we were learning more and more and more with every song that we had accomplished. And then when it was all said and done, I was like, I really feel like I understand how to do this now. And I understand what goes into making a song sound like you want it to sound. You know, if I'm hearing this artist and I want it to sound like this artist, I feel like I know how to pick it apart and put it back together now, that's all that production is. You know, somebody, puts on your plate an alien spacecraft and says, figure it out. Figure out how that thing was put together. You have no idea this technology or what it is, and you need to backwards engineer this thing. And that's what it felt like.
Yep.
And now, and that's why now I build alien spacecrafts for a living. Thank you.
That play music. And speaking of playing music, we're excited to hear you play. And here's what I'm hoping for is that we're going to have you back on the podcast in a year or 2 years from now, probably, because you're going to blow up so big after this album gets released that we have to book you 2 years out to fit into your touring schedule.
Thank you.
But yeah, we're going to get you plugged in, or not plugged in, actually, because this is totally unplugged. We're going to get you set up to play some tunes for us.
I appreciate it.
So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much.
This song's called Better For You. These pills don't please me, baby, not like you do. It's what I tell myself, but it ain't true. No, it hurts myself, and I know it hurts you too. Oh, baby, I've got to live a better man's truth. The strings of my soul, baby, tarnished and rust. The head of my heart drums covered in dust. Well, what am I to do? Well, I'm gonna choose to be a better man for you. A better man for you. Oh, I wanna be better for you. Oh, I wanna be better for you. Ooh, a better man for you. I'm damned alive, was sure damned in death. And I was sure it was gonna be my last breath. 'Twas the devil's food that I partook. I felt conviction, my soul was shook. Thief in my life, yeah, but I was the crook. The strings of my soul, baby, tarnished and rust. The head of my heart drums covered in dust. When I hear those trumpets sound at the dawn of truth, I hope I hear the choirs of angels singing, I was a better man for you. a better man for you. Oh, I wanna be better for you. Oh, I wanna be better for you. A better man for you. Oh, I wanna be better for you. Oh, I wanna be better for you. A better man for you. For you. For you. For you. This one's from my buddy Harper, who's no longer with us. But love him to death, and I was actually thinking about him just a couple of days ago. Love him to death. Miss you every day, buddy. Will I reach you, my friend, if I start calling out your name? Will I hear your gentle voice or see your pretty smile again? It's been so lonely without you here. Will you help me to quench these tears? I know someday I'm gonna hold your hand, but for now I'll kiss the atmosphere. I believe that when I sing, I can feel you in my arms. I believe that when I play, that you can feel my music in some way. La da 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 da. Will I reach you, my friend, if I start calling out your name? Will I hear your gentle voice or see your pretty smile again? I believe when I sing, I can feel you in my arms. I believe when I play, that you can feel my music in some way. I believe, yeah, I believe, I believe, yeah, I believe. Oh, oh, I believe when I sing, I can feel you in my arms. I believe when I play, that you can feel my music Yeah.